Hi guys, Z here. Talking about something I didn't think I'd talk about basically ever. Healers. They sure existed for, let me see, over 8 years, and they've definitely had some quality issues, to put it lightly. Of course, that's not talking about the healers who once had or still have good PRF weapons. Images unrelated, but it always felt as if they were never the go-to for much of anything outside of niche things at best. It kind of felt like they had identity issues even from the beginning of Heroes, as they were the designated healing support, quote-unquote. That got outclassed immediately by units like Marth and Lucina because they could also heal units with renewal weapons and have combat. And then eventually staff units would get some skills that make them more combative, like Wrathful Staff and Dazzling Staff, but they were always a lesser man's tome unit for the most part, but again, excluding the ones that had PRFs because some were kinda silly at one point, like Brave Veronica, who was a complete menace at her peak. I need to emphasize that as much because some units, even without having PRFs in a certain archetype, could still be really useful, and some units having PRFs isn't really indicative of their movement type being good, even if it can overlap, but that's just because a lot of the time they're kind of mutually exclusive. Although for what it's worth, it's not like they had bad inheritables over the course of the game, mostly being with healer specials and some weapons here and there that at least gave them some bit of utility. Oh hey, convenient video. But I don't think it's ever been to a point where it was worth going out of your way to build any staff unit that wasn't already good or had some role compression like Elamine, and it really felt like IS knew this as they continually experimented with healer inheritables like Magic Shield and Poetic Justice and... well, not Arcane Charmer. Arcane Charmer was never really that good to begin with, until they eventually found the right groove with them. And that's what leads us to where we're at now. I believe that healers are the best they've ever been, and sure, that bar is so low that it's physically impossible to trip over it, but considering how generally mediocre they've been for so long, you know, to put it lightly, it's really nice seeing them have some actual niches now. And I know this pain too well as somebody who uses range flyers, quite literally the most dead on arrival archetype for over 5 years, even with PRFs at times, because they had no skills. Every month since the start of Book 9, we've been receiving a constant amount of healer buffs that have been slowly pushing healers more and more into something generally worthwhile. In December, we had the release of Winter Hortensia, who's probably one of the most notable staff buffs to healers due to Ice Lock Plus, a la Ice Terrain and Action Economy. In January, we had the introduction of Sway skills, and while we did have the Wrathful Staff Sacred Seal before that, this meant that you didn't have to give up your Sacred Seal for it anymore, so now you could run a lot of other stuff, which could easily just be more stats during combat. February gave us Called to Serve, which was a good mix of support with bonus neutralization and true damage to allies, as well as being a decent combative B slot for the user itself. March gave us, Seal Attack Res, I guess. This was actually a dud month for healers, but that's not really the biggest deal. Last month, we got Tidings, which was just the dazzling equivalent to Sway, which is nice for other healers who overlapped with Sway to begin with. And then just a bit ago, we got Bouquet Baton from Bride Lana, which gives allies some attack and speed buffs and neutralizes their own penalties during their combat, while also granting a bunch of true damage to the user itself. And when you combine all of these skills onto one single staff unit, at minimum, you end up with a ridiculous amount of effects. A single healer without any other skill can grant penalty neutralization, bonus nullification, stats, and true damage to allies while being able to set up Ice Terrain and get assist-based Gale Force. And not only is this not taking into consideration staff specials, echo skills, and C slots, but also Lin Ring and Havoc attack res that, while not exclusive to healers, are things that they can take advantage of significantly well. So when adding those factors together, you not only have all the aforementioned effects, but now you can provide extra utility from specials that inflict gravity or flash, and movement-based support like Shadow Shift, Guidance, Cancer Control, and so much more with the B slot flexibility if they have a good res stat. And I honestly don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that healers, at the very least the flying ones, are the best generics in the game, barring melee armors, because Shield Fighter still exists, and Shield Fighter makes pretty much every single melee armor usable everywhere. And you know, this also makes the units that were already good, like Mythic Loki and Elamine, much better, but this isn't about them. But yeah, this is genuinely the first time I've ever considered building a staff unit, which feels really surreal because if you asked me like 6 months ago about how I felt about them, I would have said they were outright awful and some of the worst unit types in the entire game and that you'd have to be really stupid to build one. Well, I wouldn't have said that last part at least. To most people, staff units feel so good now that I believe you could get away with running an armor healer, and they've been notoriously the worst unit type in the entire game since conception. I'm not desperate enough to build an armor healer when I could just build a flying healer. Whoa, what a clever transition, me. I feel like the mileage you'll get out of any generic healer is going to come from the flying one since they have more skill options like Shadow Shift, Soaring Guidance, and Crux to name a few. Unfortunately, build variety really is just going to depend on the unit's stats and movement type because all of them are going to be running the same weapon, and the same assist, and the same special, and the same A slot, barring some effect variants. But that's also weirdly on brand for healers anyway, and even if they don't have the best variety, it's still pretty effective in the end. That said, if you did want some variety, then you could use the ones with actual PRFs, but even then, I think that's pushing it to some extent since the most differences that are going to come out of them are going to be from the weapon and C slot at most. Elamine still has Holy Ground Plus, which is good support, but she also has good enough flexibility to ditch her weapon for Bouquet Baton Plus, as well as run Havoc since she has a really good rest stat. It really just depends on what kind of support you want her to contribute, but she seems to be the best in that regard, especially since she has Wrathful in her C slot, which can help her lean into combat more. Hortensia and Mythic Loki are also pretty good shouts too due to their PRFs. Hortensia does have overlap and penalty neutralization, but it's still not the worst option with Glittering Anima since it's still extra true damage for herself, and you're still going to be getting a lot of debuffs from the C slot as is. Also, the weapon still provides the effect if the bonus is removed, so that's still nice under those circumstances. Loki's in a similar boat to Elamine since Loki's largest contribution is in her PRF C slot, Divine Deceit, but her weapon is still pretty decent for combat. You can pretty much just stack her res as much as possible with Havoc since that's what she was doing before this anyway, but otherwise it's still the same stuff as everyone else. And flying healers aside, there's not really a crazy amount of differences you could find in the rest of the movement types, but infantry could still run Canto Control and abuse their specials much more easily. Times Pulse Seal and Echo are pretty nice for that, but there's really not much utility for infantry besides Havoc since it's locked to them and flyers only. That said, cavalry do have the same Shadow Shift utility, but they can also get it off much more easily thanks to Far Trace Echo. Healers can also run that, but you're better off just running Soaring Echo in my opinion. And they can't run Havoc utility because they're cavalry, but they can run Attack Speed Insight Hone, which, you know, it's not as good, but it's still an option at least. And armor healers sure do exist, but they're at least a lot more usable now. They can run the Special Fighter Seal at least, but, you know, they're still going to be struggling with a lot of other support. It's not as good as infantry's getting their special off, but, you know, it's still some acceleration, and I mean, there's really not much else they could do otherwise because they're locked out of everything. And no, I don't trust them as saves whatsoever. This unit with a save is not going to live a single turn if you even attempt it. Also, I don't know how far this is pushing things, but we may be due for a couple more buffs down the line if one monthly edition for the past 6 months, ignoring March of course, is anything to go off of. The only thing healers are really missing is a good C slot to call their own, even if the options they have right now are pretty solid. And I guess a new arcane, but if it's anything like the last arcane, and 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 the last arcane, then they could just keep it. They do also have recovery skills at their disposal that are due for an upgrade, and maybe they could just be Micaiah's cleanse effect as a skill, or they could come up with something new entirely, but regardless of what they do, as long as it's good, then I feel like there wouldn't really be any reason not to build a healer at that point. Barring one issue that I will cover right now. There's just one small, tiny synonym for tiny orb-related issue with all of this. It is extremely difficult to casually get all these skills on any healer. For what it's worth though, Legendary Sakura does have Ice Lock, Sway, Call to Serve, and Holy Pressure, and they could all be inherited really easily since the prerequisites are all in demote units a la Miracle, Attack Speed Form, and Live to Serve, so that really just leaves any potential healer special changes, C slots, and Echo skills, the latter of which is still monstrously expensive. There's probably arguments for other healer specials than Holy Pressure and Glitter of Light, but I feel like these are the best ones available, with the former inflicting gravity and the latter inflicting flash, which is still really useful during the middle of a turn. I don't know about the guard one or the special decharge or any of those, but I feel like if you're going to go for anything, these are the ones you really want. Although with that said, the C slots aren't actually that hard to obtain for what it's worth, since most of the notable options are in the codes barring Firm Canto Curb, but you really don't need the tier 4 version over Canto Control 3 for the most part, since they basically do the same exact thing. Maybe there's there's like one person still running dual Leon, and you know, Sather still exists, but I feel like you don't really have to worry about it for the most part. It really is just a flex skill half of the time. Kinda sorta true with the echo skills to an extent as well, but stuff like soaring echo is still always going to be good. You may not necessarily need the extra warping utility from that alone if you're running another ally with it, but it's still really nice to have. And also there's no telling when it's going to rerun because it's locked to Ivy and she's not a normal pool unit, so I wouldn't stress over it honestly. Everything else really is just a variant of what I'm going to dub the God Healer build, and even just getting one Sakura should suffice for most units. And with Lana being in the Grails, it's actually not too bad to get going, but I wouldn't recommend killing a copy of Sakura if you don't have one to spare since she's still really strong. You would be really base if you did though. And yeah, healers sure are really cool right now. A lot of them are very much just coats of paint of one another since the only differentiation most of them have is movement typings. But in a more positive twist to that, that means you could just pick whatever favorite character you like and you should be able to get the same amount of mileage for the most part. I think. I'm still not entirely sure on the armor specifically, but you know, you can still do stuff with them, right? Also, I don't know how to end this video, so I'm just gonna go now. You make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks.